The bones were perfectly arranged. 9 chambers, 9 species. Each fossil placed like it was worshipped. But none of them should have been found in Southeast Asia. And when I matched the symbols from the crypts to carvings in Guatemala, they lit up. Who built the same temples half a world apart? Why do they each match a specific kind of dinosaur? And why is the 9th chamber still sealed? Some truths were never lost. They were hidden. My name is Dr. Elias Ward, and for more than 2 decades I've been chasing clues that were never meant to be found. Symbols that don't belong. Statues that seem to know too much. And words that appear when no one ever wrote them. Some call it madness and others coincidence. But if you've come this far, it means you're searching too, for what was forgotten, or worse, hidden. Here every episode is a clue, every symbol a story waiting to be told, and every discovery might not be mine alone. It could be yours too. The Cryptologist. Don't follow the obvious path. Follow the impossible. I was halfway through decoding an inscription from a collapsed monastery in Armenia when the email came in. No sender, no message body, just a subject line. You've seen these before. Attached were 7 grainy photos, mud-caked, staircases, carvings in half-erased stone, rows of bones. One photo caught my breath mid-sentence, a symbol etched into an archway, shaped like a spiral of claws. I'd seen it before, carved into a stone pillar deep in the Guatemalan jungle. It was identical, stroke for stroke, same weathering, same tilt, same mistake in the bottom curve, like whoever copied it did so from memory or instinct. I don't believe in coincidences, especially not when they span oceans. 48 hours later, I was stepping out of a rusted jeep into the heat-heavy air of northern Laos. The jungle here doesn't move, it waits. And it was waiting for me. A local researcher named Chanari led me along the edge of an excavation site, mostly hidden under tarps. She didn't talk much. I could tell she was still shaken, still trying to make sense of what she'd helped uncover. The site wasn't public. No coordinates had been shared. Someone had paid to keep this place quiet and buried. What they found was a temple, or what was left of one, overgrown, half swallowed by roots. But the carvings, those were intact. They lined the outer walls in a language no one could place. Symbols with weight, angular spirals, intersecting, lines, circular glyphs that pulsed with a strange symmetry. Some of them I recognized. Others felt like déjà vu wrapped in something older. Something my mind wasn't supposed to hold. But it wasn't just the glyphs. It was what lay inside. Past the threshold was a chamber, dark, silent, as if the air inside had never been disturbed. The walls narrowed downward like a funnel, ending in a platform of black stone, and on that stone were bones. Large, perfectly arranged, ribs like canoes, teeth like daggers. The skeleton of a raptor, maybe 2 meters long, but here's what made my stomach drop. It was surrounded by a pattern of white ash shaped like a sunburst. The bones weren't buried. They were offered. I stood still, listening. Not for sound, but for echo. I've spent years inside. Tombs, crypts, forgotten places. You can tell when a room has memory. This one screamed with it. When I asked Channery how they dated the site, she showed me a carbon scan from the outer wall, over 11,000 years. But the bones, impossibly, were younger, around 65 million years younger. She laughed. When she said it, but the look in her eyes wasn't humor. It was fear trying to wear a smile. That night I laid out both sets of photos, these and the ones from Guatemala. I'd been there 5 years ago, exploring a ruin so overgrown. It took us weeks just to find the entrance. At the center of that temple was a single room with walls covered in spiraling glyphs, and this is where it gets strange. 9 shallow alcoves, empty, but clearly meant to hold something. I didn't understand them at the time. Now I did. In Laos, the chamber had one fossilized raptor in the center, surrounded by 8 more alcoves, also empty. 9, always 9. I went back into the jungle the next morning, this time alone. There was a pattern to the terrain, a spiral path, almost imperceptible, traced across the hillside. Overgrown, buried under soil and time. But if you looked carefully, you could feel it, not just see it, like a memory carved into the land itself. I followed it for hours, marking coordinates, taking samples, and I found them. 8 other temple ruins, all arranged in a spiral, all connected by that invisible line, each one half sunken, each one locked behind stone, as if waiting. I didn't break the seal, not yet, but I knew what was behind them. Different species, different arrangements, each one worshipped. It's not just that they were fossilized, it's how they were displayed. Like relics, like idols, revered, not feared. But the 9th temple, that one hadn't been opened, ever. I traced the path leading to it but found only a stone monolith, unmarked, standing like a sentinel above the final chamber. No door, no inscription, just presence. As if whatever was inside didn't need an entrance. It was waiting to be called. Something about it didn't feel ancient. It felt awake. I spent the next 3 days tracing the spiral on foot. It wasn't just geographical, it was symbolic. Every temple was positioned according to a celestial alignment. Each pointed to a specific constellation visible 12,000 years ago. It was too precise for guesswork, and as I followed the coordinates across ridges and jungles, I realized this wasn't simply a burial system, it was a clock. And it was almost finished, counting down. Back in my makeshift tent, I laid out my notes, satellite images, and sketches on the ground. 9 temples, 9 species arranged like a spiral galaxy. Every one of them encoded with symbols I'd seen only in 2 other places, deep in the ruins of El Mirador, Guatemala, and in fragments of obsidian tablets found in a shipwreck off the coast of Malta. These symbols weren't local, they weren't even cultural. They were global, pan-human, almost like a linguistic fossil buried under layers of civilization. I translated what I could. One phrase kept repeating across all sites: 9 awaken the One. At first I assumed it referred to a deity, a figure, maybe a mythological construct tied to ancient cosmology. But then something shifted. I remembered an artifact I'd seen in a Berlin archive, unlabeled, damaged, bearing a carving of 9 clawed beasts surrounding a circle of fire. At the time it was catalogued as symbolic warfare. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe it wasn't metaphor, maybe it was ritual. At dusk, I returned to the first chamber and examined the spiral of ash around the raptor skeleton. I hadn't noticed before, but embedded in the floor beneath the ash were thin grooves, tiny, deliberate, forming an interlocking pattern across the chamber. The same grooves appeared in the stone of the other temple entrances I'd found but hadn't opened. It was a mechanism, not mechanical, symbolic, a ceremonial trigger. But for what? That night I was woken by a sound I still can't explain. It wasn't animal, it wasn't wind. It was low, rhythmic, and coming from underground. I followed it as far as I could, down into one of the exposed chambers, where moonlight cut across the fossil remains of a ceratopsian creature. I stood completely still, and then I saw it. The ash lines had shifted, not disturbed, shifted, as if something beneath the floor was breathing, pushing upward. The following morning, I was no longer alone. A small group had arrived at the site. Locals, yes, but different. They didn't ask who I was, they didn't need to. One of them, an older woman with silver rings across every finger, walked straight up to me and placed her hand on my chest. Then she whispered, "You're too close to the ninth." I tried to ask who they were. She only said one word, "Caretakers." They wouldn't tell me their names, but they knew every temple. They knew the ritual. They knew that no one had ever opened the ninth chamber, and they intended to keep it that way. I sat with them that night around a fire, and they told me a story passed down through generations. A story of an ancient people, not quite ancestors, not quite gods who could shape living creatures like clay. They created the 9 beasts to guard a boundary, to hold something back. When the 9 were placed in the spiral, their essence sealed the last gate. But now as the jungle shifts and the stars realign, the seal is weakening. The 9th gate is beginning to open, not by force, but by completion. One by one, the others are being restored, and someone is helping from the outside. They showed me a map marked with 9 blood-red circles. 8 of them matched my coordinates. The 9th was deeper in the mountains, covered by thick cloud forest and inaccessible terrain. They called it the Name Without Sound. Not a place, but an invocation, a summoning. That's when I realized these temples weren't graves, that they were offerings, anchors in a forgotten ritual. And someone is out there, finishing what was started 12,000 years ago. As I packed my gear to head toward the final site, the old woman stopped me again. She placed a small obsidian disc in my hand, etched with the spiral and 9 dots, and whispered, "If you hear it call you by name, don't answer." I didn't ask what she meant, because deep down I already knew. I started the hike before sunrise. The final location, what the caretakers called the Name Without Sound, wasn't on any map, just a vague outline sketched onto a piece of bark, passed from memory, buried in generations. It took me 2 days through dense forest, where every tree root felt like a tripwire and the silence grew heavier with every step. But I wasn't alone. I noticed the signs early, footprints too fresh, gear left behind in oddly intentional patterns. Someone was tracking me, but they weren't in a hurry. They wanted me to know. A shadow above the ridge, a glint of metal through the leaves. I kept moving, but slower now, ears tuned, breath low. On the 3rd day I found the structure, half covered in moss, sunken into the rock face like it had grown out of the mountain itself. No doors, no windows, and just a carved spiral, 2 meters across, sunk deep into the stone. Around it, small alcoves. Again, 9. But this time, 8 were filled. Not with bones. With blood-red stones, smooth and polished. Each one engraved with the silhouette of a different creature. The 9th alcove was empty. I stepped closer. My hand barely touched the spiral when the air shifted behind me, like a sudden drop in pressure. A voice said, "Step away, Dr. Ward." I turned slowly. 4 figures in dark cloaks, faces mostly covered, stood just beyond the overgrowth. No weapons drawn, but I knew this wasn't a conversation. "You've seen too much," one of them said. "But it's not too late to forget." I didn't respond. A sack was thrown over my head. I felt the cold bite of rope on my wrists. Then nothing but movement. Trees passing, footsteps, murmurs. I lost track of time. When they finally removed the blindfold, I was in a stone chamber lit by firelight. Not ancient, maintained, lived in. Symbols lined the walls, hand-carved, glowing faintly from heat or age. In the center, a woman sat on a low platform, surrounded by scrolls, bones, and objects I couldn't begin to classify. She looked old but not weak, like stone that had learned to wait. "You carry their scent," she said. "You've walked where they bled." I asked who she meant. "The Makers," she whispered. the ones who shaped the earth before it remembered time. She spoke of a lineage, one that didn't begin in myth but in flesh, of ancient architects who walked among early humans, not as gods but as sculptors of life. They had created the nine not as beasts of war or worship, but as barriers, anchors to keep something deeper contained, something not of this world. And then she said something that froze me. The ritual was never completed, but the spiral is closing, and someone is forcing it shut. I asked her what happens if all nine are activated. She didn't answer, just stood and walked to a basin of still water at the edge of the chamber. She stirred it once with her finger. The surface shimmered, then cleared. I saw myself, standing before the ninth alcove, obsidian disc in hand, while the spiral behind me began to glow, not from light but from memory, as if the land itself remembered what was buried beneath. I pulled away. "There's still time to stop it," I said. Her eyes didn't blink. "There's never been time. Only choice." That night I wasn't guarded. I suppose they didn't see me as a threat. I suppose they were wrong. I escaped through a tunnel carved behind a row of ceremonial masks, following airflow and instinct until the stone gave way to dirt, then forest. I ran for hours, maybe days. I don't remember sleep. I remember urgency. Returned to the first site, the raptor chamber, and found it altered. Someone had been there, the ash was gone. The grooves on the floor were deeper. The spiral had been completed, not by me. Someone else was ahead of me, and they were unlocking the temples one by one. I reached the last known coordinates just after midnight. The jungle had changed. It wasn't just the silence. Jaguars, birds, even insects had vanished, but the air itself, it was warmer, denser, like the world had begun holding its breath. I moved slowly, avoiding the path I'd taken before. Whoever was finishing the ritual wouldn't expect me to return so soon, or so reckless. I followed the ridge until I found the monolith again. But it wasn't a monolith anymore. The spiral had opened. Cracks lined its surface, glowing faintly, not with light but with heat, like it remembered fire. The ninth alcove, once empty, now held a final stone. Obsidian, carved with a creature I'd never seen. Longer skull, eyes forward, serrated tail, predatory but not primal. It looked designed. And in front of it, placed perfectly at the center of the spiral, was the disc the caretakers had given me. Someone had used it. I stepped into the spiral. The moment I did, the ground trembled beneath my feet. Not violently, but rhythmically, like something far below was shifting. Not waking, not yet, but listening, waiting to be named. I scanned the edges of the site. No movement, no watchers. Whoever had placed the final piece had already gone, or was hiding nearby. I crouched beside the obsidian stone and ran my fingers over the carving. It was smooth, perfect, like it had been etched by something that didn't use tools. The edges pulsed with heat, not physical, something deeper. A whisper entered my thoughts. Not a voice, a weight. I heard nothing, but I understood it. "You are the last," and my breath caught in my throat. I stood, but not out of fear, out of instinct. This wasn't an artifact. It was a keyhole. The real key was something else, something that had followed me since the first chamber, since Guatemala. Since before I even knew I was part of this. I pulled the obsidian disc from my satchel. For a moment I didn't move. The jungle was still. The air didn't shift, but the spiral at my feet, it waited. Not like stone, like a mind. Then, from the edge of the trees came a sound I hadn't heard in days. A human voice mocked, "You shouldn't have come back." I turned. The woman from the caretakers stood alone, her face uncovered now. She wasn't old anymore. Not in the way she had seemed. Her voice carried strength. Her eyes carried something older than language. "You were chosen to witness, not to awaken," she said. "But now it's too late." I asked her what would happen if I used the key. Her silence said enough, but I needed to know. "What's in there?" I asked. "What was sealed?" She didn't hesitate. "Memory." The word hit harder than I expected. "This isn't a prison," she continued. "It's a library, a vault of design, of code. The makers didn't just build. Guardians, they built patterns, knowledge etched into biology. You think these were monsters? No, they were sentences, and when the last one is spoken, the world remembers what it was before humans rewrote the page." She stepped toward me. "You still have time. Break the key, scatter the pieces, let the spiral remain unfinished." But I hesitated, because she wasn't wrong, and neither was I. I'd seen too much to believe this was just myth. Every fossil, every chamber, every temple, it wasn't just burial, it was instruction. A language of flesh, of form, and maybe the ninth wasn't meant to be feared. Maybe it was meant to be understood. I turned the disc. In my hand it pulsed once, warm, familiar. Like a heartbeat I'd forgotten was mine. I looked at her one last time. "If this was always meant to stay hidden," I said, "why leave the spiral unfinished?" She answered with something that chilled me to my core. "Because only one who doesn't belong to them can open it." Before I could ask what that meant, the ground beneath the stone split. A low tone, deep, harmonic, ancient, echoed from below. The monolith cracked fully down the center. Light, faint but growing, poured from the fissure. The spiral responded. It began to glow, not in fire but in sequence. Each point along its path lit up, as if acknowledging completion. One by one, 9 in total. And then, silence. No explosion. No tremor. Just a sudden, overwhelming sense of presence. The jungle exhaled, and something far below exhaled with it. I didn't move, because I realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. Whatever I had just opened, it didn't want out. It wanted me in. The light faded, but it didn't vanish. It sank, folding back into the cracks like breath returning to a chest that had held still for too long. I stood alone at the center of the spiral, the obsidian disc still warm in my palm. The forest around me had gone utterly still. No wind, no insects, no rustle of life, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. And then it came. Not a voice, not a sound, but a sensation, a presence that filled the space like fog. Ancient, not malevolent, but aware. It didn't feel like I was being watched. It felt like I'd been recognized. From the cracked monolith, a pulse of heat shimmered outward. The spiral at my feet glowed in response, but not all at once. Each of the 9 points began to light up, one by one in a precise rhythm, as if each had to remember its part. In the sentence before the message could be complete, and when the 9th lit, everything around me shifted. The jungle melted away. For a moment, or maybe a minute, maybe longer, I stood not in the world I knew but in a memory of Earth. The sky above me was thicker, tinged with red. The air was wet with heat. Mountains in the distance curved unnaturally, as though shaped by will instead of time. And below me across the land I saw them, the 9, not skeletons, not fossils, living, massive, elegant, impossible. Each moved with intention, not instinct. They didn't hunt, they patrolled. They were not rulers of the world. They were guardians of something else, of what came before, and then I saw it. At the center of their formation, buried in a chasm of spiraling stone, was the 10th form. Not a creature, not a machine. A pattern, pulsing, breathing, held in place by the orbit of the 9, whatever it was. It had no shape, but I knew its name, not because I heard it, but because I could have spoken it. And that's when the vision ended. I collapsed to my knees in the real world, gasping for breath, soaked in sweat, my heart pounding as if I'd been sprinting for hours. The spiral had gone dark. The monolith stood still, nothing moved, but everything had changed. I looked at the obsidian disc. The spiral carved into it had shifted, subtly, but undeniably. There were now 10 dots. Behind me, footsteps. I turned slowly. The woman from the caretakers had returned, but her expression had changed. There was no fear, no warning, only a quiet resignation. "It remembered you," she said. I asked what it meant. She looked past me toward the monolith. "The 9th name is not spoken, it is chosen, and now it has a vessel." I froze. "No," I said. "I didn't release anything." She tilted her head. "You didn't release it. You finished it." She stepped closer. For 12,000 years, this ritual waited for a voice that didn't belong to the bloodlines that built it. Someone who could see the spiral, but not be trapped inside it. "You were never meant to find it, Dr. Ward. But now that you have, you carry the memory forward." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. I knew what she meant. The ritual hadn't awakened a creature. It had transferred something. Not physically, conceptually. It was knowledge, language, pattern. And it was now. In me, I stood in silence as she turned and disappeared into the forest. I didn't follow. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me was still unfolding. Even now, I don't fully understand what I carry, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the 9 again, standing in formation, watching, waiting, not for me, for what comes next. The world is full of things we were never meant to find. But sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't what was buried. It's what we were always meant to become. And if there's a 9th name, then there were 8 before it, which means this wasn't the first spiral, just the one I happened to step into. Maybe another is already turning somewhere else, waiting for someone else to finish what no one remembers starting. Or maybe it's you.